3, 2, 1, go. It's some sort of.
Gotta like shake it off.
So, Katie,
Yes.
is no process a process?
Yes, of course it is. Even if you have no process documented, there's still some process that happens to get work done, no matter if it's product, no matter if it's engineering or some other organization within the, or some other department within the organization. Maybe we could talk about this later. Where my head has been about this is just sometimes process can be stifling. I've been in that environment. Sometimes lack of process or little process can be exciting and invigorating. I believe there is a happy medium there, but we can dig into that later, I guess. But yeah, I mean, if you have no process, there's some process happening to get work done, or maybe you're not releasing. Maybe you're not doing your job. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I think I generally agree. I think people are afraid of processes because they think they're large.
Yeah.
I think you make them what they are. I don't think, if it's like I talk to somebody and they talk to somebody, that can be as much as it is, right? I look at them as important for how work gets done, right?
Yeah.
And repeatably, right? Otherwise,
Mhm.
it's not repeatable. I mean, no process is a process means we do things differently every single time. It also feels like
Yes.
I mean, the outcome, I guess, is in the spirit of being the same, but
Yeah.
I think it's good for transparency. I think it's good for, I mean, at least for me, it's good for writing it down, like what I have to do,
Yeah.
who I need to talk to, that kind of stuff. I don't like a lot of people look at it as red tape to get something done and it stops them from getting something done. But I guess from an engineering perspective, I want repeatable stuff. Like
Mhm.
we build, not maybe how I code, right? But,
Sure.
how we talk about things, how we look at things, how we, the business of your business, I guess, right?
Mhm.
Whatever that happens to be. I just, it's, it, it, it hurts me in my soul when it's just like all over the place. Like I
Chaos.
mean, I crave order, I guess, and I'm a planner, I guess, by nature. But
Mhm.
it's just I don't know how it's repeatable. Like I don't know what the outcome is going to be or how we're getting to there. Right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the process
Yeah.
can be like I'm going from point A to point B. I kind of don't care necessarily about the journey from point A to point B, but I do care about how I get there.
Mhm. I
Right.
mean, I think
And it's not
you
that it can change. It can't change either. I mean, like it needs to fit who you are.
who you are
You
as
know
an
what I mean?
organization.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
even
yeah.
who you are as a person, right? Like this is my
Sure.
process of how I build software. Me
Yeah,
myself.
I mean, yeah, for sure. Because when I was thinking about the topic, it's I've come into a number of organizations where there has not been a process, or there's been a really uh, we're not saying expletives on this show, right? But there's been a really crappy process, or a poor process in place. And so you can see, I mean, this is my experience, right? So you come into some place that has poor process or no process, and typically quality is an issue, or prioritization is an issue, or all we're doing is fighting fires, or, I mean,
I
take
think
your
that
pick,
even
right?
happens. That happens when you have a process.
It
I mean,
can, but
I
it's
think how you
worse.
respond to them. I think how you respond to them is different,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah. But I mean, in terms of coming into chaos, it's usually because there is no predictable, repeatable process in place. And the impacts of that are rather large, right? So, from my perspective, I have a way, just like you were saying, I have a way that I do product. And so I'll come in and kind of start to do things the way I do things, and try to carry along whoever I can, depending on the organization. Um, but it's smaller organizations are much easier to make that happen. But big organizations are tough too. And that is a different type of challenge for me. It's knowing what the
I
process is, and having to live within a giant process that just slows you down. That's really tough for me. But anyway.
I used to be prescriptive. I'm
Mm-hmm.
less prescriptive now. What do I care about? I care about transparency. I care about quality. I care about reliability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are the things I care about. How I get there, right, doesn't, as long as we're doing things in a repeatable way, like I can understand that, then I'm not super worried about it, right? Like I
Yeah.
used to be like, this is the way it needs to be done. I care more now. I don't have, in some cases, I don't live in their process or
Sure.
live in the process. So what I care about are, these are the gates, and that we understand what those
Yeah.
gates are, and then we move on. And I say gates here, not
Stage
as a
gates.
linear, not as a linear thing, but like, I expect to be told when things are going sideways. I expect to be, that kind of stuff, right? And some of those are just norms. I guess,
Mm.
what do they call them?
Working norms. Working.
No, 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 no. There's a word for them. It's like teams rules of the road. I forget what it's called. Like those
That.
artifacts that,
Yeah. Yeah.
working agreements,
Working
right? Like,
agreements. Yes. Yes.
yeah, there
Yes.
it is.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think those are true. I think those are just being a good team member, but you know,
Yeah.
I I I'm not shocked when I see things like there is no process, right? Or you're missing things like touch points to make sure people are aligned, right? Go back to alignment, right? Like it just, oh, you
I,
didn't tell me. I mean, I don't know. We talked to Mia about it, right?
yeah.
Like it's like, you got to be after the outcome, whatever the
Yeah.
outcome happens to be. And I think how you align. I think it's funny that, oh well, we don't do stand-ups anymore, we do them in Slack. But there's a, you know if you're doing things the right, my feeling is, if you're doing things the right way, it's like 3 or 4 minutes and you're out,
Yeah.
right? it's not
Yeah.
it's not very long.
Well,
So
and that's, I mean,
it's harder with distributed teams, right? Where teams span a
yes.
bunch of stuff. I think there's a running conversation, but I still believe, regardless of the situation, that there needs to be room to sync up.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
It could just be as simple as that, right?
it could
Like,
be.
yeah, I think it's anything to me. It's about supporting repeatability.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have that, like I said earlier, if you don't have the consistency, the impact of that is far reaching, in my opinion. Um, and I am of the mind that if you come into some place as a product person that doesn't have a process, that could easily be something that you as a product person could shape and influence and get everybody working in the direction that you need. And I think it's a responsibility of product to do that if it's lacking, right? So product people sit in the center of the madness essentially, right? And so if you're not coordinating or aligning or working with all these other teams in a consistent way, um, or you identify that it's not happening that way and it needs to happen that way, you're prime candidate to make it happen that way, because you're
How much
talking to all these
underneath?
people.
How much underneath do you get? Like, walk me through the process of trying to do that.
Okay, so I mean, I have a really good example. So I came into an organization that didn't have product. I mean, they had product, but it was a very young product organization. Um, and there was no, honestly, I don't even remember how product was working with engineering, but there was no process in place. And you had, you know, requests coming in from all over the organization, customer support, direct from the president, whatever it was. Um, and so it was chaos. I mean, I literally walked into chaos. And the first thing I did, and this is my preference, the first thing I started to say was, okay, we need a process by which product can come to engineering and say, hey, these are the things we need to be working on. And so that engineering understands what the outcome should be, what we should be doing, what the focus is, all of that stuff. And engineering shouldn't be telling product that, right? Like I shouldn't be going to engineering and say, what are we working on and why are we working on it? So it kind of um we've talked about this a number of times, but it will kind of shift an organization. If there is no product, we've said this before, if there is no product or if product is not strong within an organization, engineering will fill the gap or somebody will fill the gap. And I think where there is no process, engineering fills that gap. That's what I've seen. That's
Yeah,
actually what I'm living right now. So,
well, yeah, I think that happens that way because they, like, it can't just be
you can't not
all
do
the
anything.
things. Yeah, I mean, it's like, or you're just walking up to people, tapping on the shoulder and telling
Yeah.
them what to build. I
Yeah.
like, I do agree with that. I think the process needs to be, in my mind, a collective shared experience,
Absolutely.
meaning they need to collectively need to come, like, where it's not collaborative, I, how do we get work done? How do we want to work together?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? As teams, right? And I think what I've seen happen is when you have multiple product manager or multiple teams, that's where you get more aligned around a common process. But I think
Sure.
if it's just one person, or product in one team, like, you don't need that, right? um
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you
it's
don't need
because,
as
like, it's
much.
understanding what people need to understand about what they need to know, right?
Mhm.
Like, you can try to make common things, but at the end of the day, typically those teams are working on different things. They're not working on the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Or, maybe it's somewhat similar, right? Because the teams, in my mind, teams are unlocked in terms of agility when they don't have high cohesion to each other, right? As soon as it bothers me when I hear, well, I'm waiting on some other team, right? Because that forces you into this serialization of a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this gets into like critical path stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean all the things that people hate but still end up doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't want to talk about it, they just want to like ignore it, and then it happens, and then it's like, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, you didn't talk about it,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
people, I just try to not make it, I try not to use the word process, and I try to, how are we going to get work done,
Yeah. I think
right?
that's a
Because
better way to
process
frame
has
it.
this allergic reaction
Oh my God.
to,
Yes.
oh my God, you're
Call it what
telling
you
me what I
want.
can't
It's like
do.
MVP. You know, it's the same kind of like people hate the word, but call it what you want. It is what it is. But I mean, I will say, like, many times when there has been no process and we've had to start defining how we work, there is always, well, not always, there has been many times where, have been many times where engineering is like, nope, I'm not, I'm not doing that, right? And I think that's just a matter of the situation because they kind of had free reign to do what they want. And
Oh,
then
it's totally about
now,
control. It's
yeah,
totally about control.
yeah, now we're
Am
asking
I?
you, like, we got to come together, we got to start rowing in the same direction. And they're like, no. That's been an interesting challenge too. Um, but I think to your
What?
point, it's like, how do we work together? How do we get work done? How do we achieve our outcomes? Like, if you're talking in that kind of language, it doesn't feel so confining.
Yeah, the flip side of that is then, uh, where people use the process to shield them from stuff that they should be doing. Oh, well, that's not what we do.
That's not how we do it.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's like, come on now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we all want to get paid, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so let's
Yeah.
like do. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't like. It's both ends of the spectrum. It's like,
Mm.
I want complete control, and I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And oh well, they didn't do the exact same thing, and it's like we're collectively trying to get to the same place. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we get there, right? And I think, I don't know, we, because they're separate functions, they, arguably they should be one team. Like if they were in a small team, you know, go
Mm.
do whatever you need to do and that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I,
I
I
mean, I
just,
think if you've got guardrails, like if you've got common guardrails for teams, then you can, especially if you have dispersed teams, you can come together. And this is what I've experienced in the past too, is like you come together and decide how are we going to do this within whatever guardrails we've been given. What I hate is what you're just talking about is like, well, this is the process and you like, that's not how this works, or no, you got to do step 2 before you do step 3. And it's like, but that's just a waste of time.
well,
Campers. Ugh.
I think you need to, I don't feel like you need to do anything that you don't need to do, but like, I feel a lot of people use it mm, as a reason not to do things too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to come back and say, how are we? Like, I honestly believe, I think people just go through the motions in retrospectives
Yeah.
because it's too hard to make the changes they want to make. I don't believe that, but like I think no one wants to, you know what I mean? Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to shield myself from the other person as much as I can during the development process. And then when I get to the retrospective, I'm not going to be necessarily honest about it. Right? Like that's how I feel it goes sometimes. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, are you getting better? right? And I feel like continual improvement,
Yeah.
continuous learning, like those should, how did this go? How do we, are the things we should change, or this is what I experienced? Like it's just basically like a normal relationship. I don't know,
Yeah.
you should be like, I don't know. It's
I feel like that's a cultural thing though, like in the culture of the organization, whether or not, and I say that because I've been in places where I've experienced exactly what you just said, but I've also been in places where we have very honest conversations about things and we do make changes or did make changes. So I think it's, what is it, psychological safety, right? But um it plays a big part in whether or not you can continually improve, because
I
yeah, a
think
lot of places say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, we adhere to these, agile um concepts, but like how much of that is honest and how much of that is just lip service? And I know in my career it's been a lot of lip service. So I mean, I think I'm at a point in my career where I would, and I am, when in the situation, but would be honest more so than I was in the beginning of my career.
yeah, I think I go back to what can I control and what can I control. I
Sure.
can only,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? Like I'm going to ask for feedback. I'm going to
Yeah.
provide honest feedback. I'm, and that goes where it goes, right? I think eventually people understand that they'll, you know, if we continue to be successful, and that people eventually kind of like start doing it, but you got to provide the space and you got to celebrate it,
Hmm.
right? I not everybody, right, like it's not everybody wants to speak up in a meeting like that. Like that takes a certain type of personality, and I think it's how do you know your team members well enough in order to be able to bring that to the forefront, right? And either side conversations or that kind of stuff, right?
Hmm.
um that's the other problem, right? Is like some people just won't say anything, or they don't know they can say anything, or the
Yeah.
norm on the team may be something else, right? I mean, and then this happens at every level, right? It's not just engineering teams, it's
No.
every you know boss
Yeah.
and direct employee, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't know what the norms are, you don't know where you can push them, especially coming into a new one, what a new organization, it gets a little
Hmm.
difficult, right? What's the standard of work? I hold myself to a different standard than
Hmm.
maybe others, right? Like everybody goes through that, and
Yeah.
it's and so for me, right, if people can act how they want to act, perfectly fine with me. This is
Hmm.
how I'm going to do it. This is how I've been successful, right? And it's really
Yeah.
just what are the key things, right? I want to be transparent. I want to make sure I'm focused on the right thing, and I just want to get stuff done. And I want people that are doing stuff with me to feel like they're having fun.
Yeah. I would say I agree with those points. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would add to that list. I think if you have those things, it feels like a partnership, and you don't necessarily need a rigid process to get all those things that you talked about. But yeah. Um hmm,
So we can cut this here. I mean, it's been 23 minutes.
yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else to say.
Yeah, there was like, no, I think I got my point about guardrails. It's just, and you said like, I just think it can't be stifling. That's the whole thing. Process can't be stifling because
I think with
process can stifle innovation. No.
don't know if I agree. I think my point of view on process is not. I I I mean, from my perspective, right? Like, how do we build software? And that
Mhm.
is the mechanics of the things we do. I have a
Mhm.
story, I have a story, I write the code, right? I need traceability, right? At the end of the day, I need traceability. Code to story, code to production, right? Like at the end of the
Mhm.
day, I I'm not saying what goes in there. Like everybody gets caught on, well, you won't let me do the things I want to do. No, I'm looking for a repeatable process that makes things reliable so that none of us get woken up in the middle of the night,
Mhm.
right? Because as soon as people just start willy-nilly start throwing things out there and there is no real standard around how we should build things. And I'm not telling you how to write the code. I'm just saying the big block steps. That's
Mhm.
it, right?
Yeah.
It's that's if that's stifling, that doesn't make any sense to me.
No,
You
I don't
got to
think.
push your code anyways, right? You've
Yeah.
got to push your code anyways. You should make sure it's of quality, I would hope,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you don't have time. Okay, fine, right? But like then craft a engineering process that automates the safety for you.
Mm.
That's simple, right?
Yeah.
If it's repeatable, it can be automated, right? So now all of that stuff is all the oh my god, I have to fill this stuff out. Yeah. It's because nobody puts any time into kind of automating the redundant stuff and they just hate doing the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah, I hate it. I'm sure everybody hates it, but
Mm.
like, when you do a build, run tests. Oh, well that's too hard. Well then I don't know what to, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know where to go with that, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I think from my perspective, like the comment of process stifling innovation is thinking about all of, like, in my mind, um a product process has all of these different points. And there was a project I worked on that was in a regulated space, and the process for that was incredibly stifling. And I mean, you have to get, obviously, in a regulated space, you have to get creative, but it was it was really tough and not a lot of fun. Um so, I guess that's kind of where I was coming from. Is it obviously depends on the business, depends on the organization, industry, etc. But um
Well,
I
I think it needs to be applied for what your operating environment is, right? Highly high compliance doesn't mean you can't innovate. It means you can
no,
innovate like your peers or like the person sitting next to you not working in that, right? Like
sure, 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 sure.
we conflate the, oh, I can go do all, so and so that I talked to yesterday can do whatever they want whenever they
Amazon
want.
can do this.
But that's not even true,
Right.
right? That's the story people hear. It may be
Yeah.
true, it may not be true, or it was true at one point,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. I think um in those regulated spaces, though, you have um s- where things are heavily regulated. There's all of these processes, and I'm like outside of product, right? And I think that becomes just how the organization works, right? And so then that's applied to product, and it's that's a hard place to be in. But
comply.
anyways,
I always look at compliance as a set of rules I have to meet, right?
It
Like at
is,
the
but
end
when
of the
it
day, it's
influences
like,
the process, it's tough.
yeah, because most of those organizations have processes in place to
Right.
ensure, right, to de-risk it, right? And so
Exactly.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, you can still get it done.
You can. You can.
But I mean, again, it's not going to be like, the three-person shop down the road. It's just not going to
No.
be like that, right?
No. No, it won't. It won't be. But I don't miss it. I don't miss highly regulated
I don't mind
industries.
it. I don't mind it. Like, I just, like, I guess at this point, I don't mind any of that stuff because, like, there's a path there,
There is, but
right?
it's slow. I think for me, the each time I was in a space like that, it was very slow. And that's tough for me personally.
So we're gonna try a new thing, Katie. We've asked
Okay,
for
Chris.
questions. We've asked for questions. We have questions. We have a question. If there are
Mm-hmm.
more questions, please send them to us because that gives us more stuff to talk about. So I'm going to read this question. You can answer it.
Oh, okay.
Um, so at times I'm too prescriptive in the requirements, but I write with these things in mind. One, I want requirements to be useful to the entire team, devs during build, QA, UX during testing and review. Two, the more detail I can provide, the fewer headaches and questions that show up later. And three, platform A might interpret something in a different way, and platform B might interpret something in another way, leading to potential bugs/rework. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So
Um,
you
I
give your
just,
perspective, I'll give my perspective.
yeah. So, first, I can definitely relate to having been in this position and sometimes still being in this position, my current um in my current job. But I've come to I think there I've come to this place mentally for myself. I have to provide whatever level of detail the team needs in order to do the work. Where I am right now, that level of detail is the like least level of detail I've ever had to provide. And I think that says something about product in the organization I work in and something about engineering. And I think it also probably has something to do with working on a highly technical product, right? But I used to always want to provide very prescriptive stories, very prescriptive requirements um, for my teams. And while it was helpful, people were very grateful for that because wow, we don't get this level of detail from anybody else. It was a lot of work and I didn't need to be that prescriptive because people know how to do their jobs, right? So, and I think there needs to be space for people to do their jobs. And when I was trying to be that prescriptive, I was trying to make a perfect product and that just doesn't exist, right? So like what can you accept? What can the business accept? And I think you have to find like a happy space there, like a happy medium, and let people do their job. Like I just don't think we as product people can first know all the details and know how everything is supposed to work because that's part of what engineering is supposed to help us with. But that's kind of where my head is on this one. I think it's a lot of time spent
I
on
believe
things you
this
shouldn't be
podcast
doing.
has changed you.
I mean, I think it's a combination of things, right? Like surely our
I'm going.
conversations.
I'm going with the podcast has changed you.
But two, just like what I'm experiencing in my current position, it's quite different, right? I came in with this mentality, essentially from this question of being very prescriptive. And honestly, I'm in a position because it's so technical, I can't be prescriptive. Like, I don't know how it works, you know? So I just have to give like a high level
Like the
requirement now.
underlying detail.
Yeah, like the underlying
Yeah.
technology. I
But
don't understand it. So I
but
can't tell you how to do it.
but you understand. So like I guess depending on your point of view, right? The level of detail I would look to provide is how are people going to experience, see, right,
Yeah,
and the job to be done, right?
sure.
What is the problem I'm trying to solve? I
Yes.
feel like, when you get into platform A, platform B, right? If you've made a decision, let's just say, like there's a bunch of trade-off decisions, if you're doing iOS, Android, or if you've decided to do some, React Native or
Yeah.
whatever, right? You're making each one of those decisions makes a series of trade-offs that I think are not understood at the time that people make them,
Mhm.
right? But affect the overall process, right? If you go React Native, you can't get all the cool stuff that maybe the
Yeah.
UI UX folks want, right?
Sure.
And so you're paring that down. And you just kind of have to understand how important each one of those things when you set out to do this is important to help make the right
Mhm.
decision, right?
Mhm.
I don't think there are very many one-way doors, but sometimes that happens. And I think it's I've always erred on the side of what people can see as the level of detail and then trying to get that to as quickly as possible, right? Because you'll give here's what the outcome or the problem to be solved is. The UI UX folks will do it in a specific way. At the end of the day, it gets all the way down to the engineers. Even if they're all working, right? There's implicit functionality that kind of trickles its way down that's never talked about, but expected
Mhm.
to be there. Oh, that button works that way?
Yeah.
Well, that's not how any other button works, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that code actually has to be written. So it's like you don't want to go too far down because I feel like when there's an expectation, then there's a problem.
Mhm.
Right, because if I can't meet it for whatever reason, that's where this tension shows up for I don't sometimes it's just not worth it, right?
Mhm.
Like, you know, be specific about the job you want finished, be open to how you get there,
Yes.
right?
Yes. That's exactly it. I think, you know, mm, depending upon the space you're in, um, if you're working against a timeline or a contract, right? You're probably thinking, "Oh, I don't have time to do that." But what you said is absolutely right. And I think you can do that. You can do that throughout a project. Like, I'm just stuck on it because I'm just stuck on where this guy is. But yes, exactly what you just said. Exactly what you just said. Like,
Yeah. I think visuals, stuff people
yeah,
can see, right?
yeah,
Something common that everybody can see because everybody uses technology these days,
yeah,
right? The problem you're trying to solve,
yeah,
right? And then be open to like the problem is, and I used to do this a lot, right? Is you'd come in and say, this is how I want it built. And it in some cases, one, it disincentivizes the team, right?
yes, yes,
That's the biggest
yes,
one, right? I don't want to be told what to do, you're telling me what to do, right?
exactly. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, and then eventually it's like, well, this is what I need out of it. How do we get there?
yeah,
Is now the comment. Like this
yeah.
is this is how it needs to work. Now, you could be depending on the team, right? Sometimes you have to be prescriptive, but
You,
I wouldn't start there, right?
no.
I would start with a lot of people want to learn, you know, and then I would get that's why to me it's always like what people can see, what people can see, what people can see, and putting it in people's hands. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think the bugs are always going to be there,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're never going to avoid that, right? I think if you're going to have bugs and rework, there's like the bugs are, I just say, an artifact. If you're having a lot of them, we should talk about how we build quality
Yes.
code
Yeah.
as a, but not
Maybe you
as
need a
a.
process. Yeah.
Let's talk about how we build quality code, right? Like,
Yes.
the steps we do that we think ensures code quality,
Mm.
but not as a function of requirement, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right.
I
And then
mean,
rework I can kind of understand. Like sometimes that happens, right?
yeah,
That's a misunderstanding, but I think it's the check for
maybe.
understanding.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Not always.
Everybody
I don't
hears
think it
something
always
different.
is. Sure. I mean, yeah, it's everybody's interpretation of the requirement. That is another thing. But like I think the other thing too that product people get wrapped around is that we think we have to know how. It's not our job. Like our job is the what, right? The what and the why. And then we go to engineering, we go to UX, we say, how can we do this?
Hmm.
And all of, I mean, I can't tell you the conversations I've been in with engineering or UX, and we're trying to solution things, or I'm trying to solution. And they're just looking at me like, why are you doing that? So yeah, I think exactly what you said is absolutely right. Like, you only should worry about the what and the why. Let the people do their
What they're
job.
paid to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's nuance, right? I get it. But like, I think from the perspective of this person who asked this question, as a product person, you gotta remember what your job is. And it's not
And
everybody else's job.
constantly making sure that people understand the what and
Yes.
why, what
Yeah.
and why, what and
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just here's your what, here's your why, go build it. It's every day.
Yeah.
How does that solve the why? How does that solve the why? How does that solve the why? Or how
Mm-hmm.
does that solve, right? How does it solve this? Right. Because now I sit in these meetings, it's actually liberating for me. I sit in these meetings and it's like, these are the things I care about. How do we get there? I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
can ask a little bit more questions. Like sometimes I'll get a little bit more prescriptive if I believe there's a technical reason that we need to be open to something,
Mm-hmm.
why isn't that an API when I know I'm going to call it that? Like that kind of level of detail, but it's not prescriptive. It's like, I think it makes sense to make that an API because I got this other use case that we're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Versus like, oh, well, I didn't write it that way. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of those are standards about how you should be building software, but sometimes it's just like, we may want to reuse this in some other way. Can we not, or what would it take to do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't get any more prescriptive underneath that unless specifically asked. Right. If
And
someone comes to me and specifically asks, then sure, I'll tell you how I would build it, but
right.
don't take that as the truth.
Yeah.
Take that as just my perspective on what I think is important, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't live in the code every day. I don't write the code every day. You've got to live with this. You know, sometimes people come and ask, sometimes they don't. And a lot of times they come up with better solutions than I would have come up with because I'm spending about this amount of time thinking about it when they're spending, this amount of
Mm-hmm.
time thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. There's another point I was going to make. Oh, so when you are creating user stories, oh, there goes my lights, that are very prescriptive, that can essentially create a dependency on you that you're not going to want long term. But I also think it kind of lets the team off a little easy because, like you said earlier, it's what they're being paid to do, right? It's their job. It's UX's job. It's engineering's job.
It's what they
Um,
like to do, right?
I, I mean, it's what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, it's, you know, yeah, that was a tough one for me to kind of let go of, because I felt like if I could describe and be prescriptive, then I could get this product. But it never eliminated the bugs. It never eliminated rework. Um, it just, it didn't do what I was looking for. It just created a lot of
Yeah,
work for me.
I find the bugs and rework happen because we defer work until the
Hmm.
last moment. So like um deployment, right? As soon
Mm.
as I have a piece of working code that is deployable, I'm forcing that particular issue. Not because anybody will necessarily use it, but because the mechanism to deploy things does not yet exist and people don't know, right? So you got to start building that muscle, right? And
Mm.
I think that's why I start with what people see and showing it to people often, i.e., making everything transparent just to get the feedback early, right? Because the problem is if you wait, and this happened to me more times than I'd like, the last 2 weeks becomes like this death march to trying to get it done because people have business planned around that, right? And so if I know 4 months ago that these were going to be problems, like we can business plan around that. I can't business plan around 2 weeks where all the stuff is ready to go, the campaigns are ready to go, and now all of a sudden I can't make the date, and now we're just push, 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 and then all of a sudden we got these bugs that we're going to spend the next. We're gonna we're gonna work everybody to get it out, and then we're going to spend the next 6 to 8 weeks just fixing it, and it's just like, well, just move it left,
Yeah.
all of it left, and get everybody that needs to see it in as early as possible.